All right, we'll start the meeting. First bill on the agenda today is Senate Bill 3163, income tax authorized credit for certain expenditures for railroad reconstruction or replacement new rail infrastructure. Currently, there are 22 short lines in Mississippi comprising of about 1,600 miles of track. These small railroads serve businesses in Vicksburg, Ripley, Fulton, Ackerman, lots of small cities all across our state. I believe 32 out of the 52 members of the Senate have short line railroads in their districts. This is about maintaining and building new track, and they must, under this incentive, every short line in Mississippi qualifies. The short line must spend their own money first, and there is a tax credit equal up to 50% of the qualifying investment, and the tax credit amount is capped at $5,000 per track mile owned or leased in Mississippi. And the tax credit can be claimed or transferred to a customer or another taxpayer in Mississippi. It's kind of an explanation of the bill. There is a reverse repealer in it. We had talked about how to fund it and whether to use just capital expense money to fund the tax credit, but that is the explanation of the bills. Are there any questions? Seeing none, for a motion. Motion is title sufficient do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Next is Senate Bill number 2983. This is the MDA bond bill. This is kind of a dummy bond bill. I'm going to add make an amendment at the appropriate time for reverse repealer, but this is basically a vehicle for MDA and a lot of the programs that they have through their agency. And this bond bill will be available for us to kind of proceed. One of the things that is in here deals with site selection that I want to draw your attention to. It just has some language that also kind of addresses some of the needs they have with the site selection. You remember last year we put a bunch of money out there to identify several sites and get them shovel ready. So that's one of the biggest problems we have is the fact that when site selectors come, there's not very many sites that are shovel ready to start. And so there's some language on line 215 that also allows for option property that they can use to help move that a little further on the site selection process. So that is the explanation of the bills. Are there any questions? All right, I want to make an amendment to add a reverse repealer to this bill. Section 9. So are there any questions? You have a question on reverse repealer? Okay. Seeing no questions, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Reverse repealer will be added to that bill. Senator McDaniel?
Question on the bill.
Sure.
Each year, obviously, there's an omnibus bond bill that's pushed through. Will this be that mechanism?
We'll have two different, there's another bill in here that's a IHL and state institutions. We just had one for MDA and one for the bond bill. Okay. Who knows if we're going to have a bond bill this year? I think we just wanted to have something available for MDA separate from the other expenses.
Okay.
Capital
just a
expense
couple
projects.
Of questions generally. Presently today, what is our bonding indebtedness?
I don't have that number with me right now, but I'll get it. I'll get it before we get on the floor for you.
No problem. Just one more too, when you get a chance,
yeah.
How much it takes each year to service that indebtedness. I'd like to see those amounts if possible.
I'll get that to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Senator Bryan.
Mr. Chairman, last year you were nice enough to let me offer an amendment to add $1 million to a specific project identified under the Mississippi Major Impact Authority Act. Actually, this is to make up for $4 million, which a long time ago was scheduled for this entity, and it never worked its way there. And so the chair has been nice enough to let me try to remedy that at $1 million a year. So I would offer the same amendment I offered last year.
Okay. You heard the amendment. Are there any questions?
Didn't hear it.
Would you?
The acoustics are kind of graphic.
I understand. Senator Bryan, would you explain your amendment?
I'm sorry, is this better?
Better.
Last year, the chair agreed that I could offer an amendment for a $1 million additional in the Major Economic Impact Authority legislation for a project This project had $4 million earmarked for it a number of years ago. And that $4 million never got to it. And believe me, you don't want to hear the story. But the chair has been nice enough to let me try to make that up $1 million a year. So that's the thrust of the amendment.
No questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. All right, any other questions on the bill? For motion. Motion is title sufficient to pass committee sub. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Next is Senate Bill 3153. These are the bonds authorized to assist paying costs to IHL, community college, junior colleges, state agencies, capital improvements. This, Senator McDaniel, would be the mechanism by which, if we were going to have a bond bill for projects, this is the vehicle we would use to do that. And it is a dummy bill for all intents and purposes. And we will, at the appropriate time, add an amendment for reverse repealer to make sure this stays alive and continues through the process. Are there any questions on the bill? All right, I'll make a motion. We add a reverse repealer. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Any further questions? Motion is title sufficient to pass committee sub. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Next is Senate Bill 3150. I'm going to recognize Senator Blunt to explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill sponsored by Senator Frazier for a project that is in his district located in the city of Jackson. I think many of you have already seen or been to that we think can be expanded significantly to bring economic growth to the city of Jackson. It is in the Fondren neighborhood where the new bowling alley and the former Capri Theater are located. That project, as you know, is locally owned by Mississippians and Robert St. John in particular, who's been a successful restaurateur in the Hattiesburg area for about 30 years. What the bill would do would be to amend the existing program that is run through MDA to add this additional project to allow for the issuance of bonds to build a parking garage behind the Capri Theater to serve the economic growth in the area. I want to emphasize that those bonds will be issued and will be backed by Hinds County. So if for any reason the project is not successful, the county will make the state whole. This is the same method that we use to complete the Westin Hotel across from the federal courthouse downtown. So the state will issue the bonds. MDA will have authority over the project. MDA may require county or private participation in the project. And MDA will negotiate with the county the terms of the loan. The county will then get payments from the private developers, which will then be used to repay the state. And again, I'll say, if for any reason this does not work, the county is on the hook for the state to be paid back. And the property will be owned by the taxpayers of Hinds County after the loans are repaid. That's an explanation of the bill, Mr. President. I'll be happy to yield for any questions. Mr. Chairman, excuse me. Be happy to yield for any questions.
That was good. No. Senator Jordan has a question.
It is up to 20 million. We think the amount may be less than that, and that will be negotiated between the private developers, Hinds County, and MDA.
Any other questions?
If there are no other questions, I'm sorry.
Senator Blackman has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You indicated that this is the same way Westin was done.
Part of the Westin, yes, ma'am. And it's been successful. And the Westin has made all its payments on time.
So when the Westin was done, it was MDA that was doing all
That was part of the project. Obviously, it was not, the entire project was not funded in this way, but part of it was.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Filligan, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, quick question. So if you're going to bond up to $20 million for a parking garage,
Right?
are there going to be fees assessed to park there? If
Yes.
it's public money, will the public just get to park for free?
No, there would be fees. It is anticipated that the county would then work with the developers to construct the garage. The public would park in the garage, the revenue, and there would also be rent charges, as potentially housing development associated with the garage, sort of like what you see behind the manship, something akin to that. And then the businesses would pay rent. But yes, the public would pay to park in the garage, and the revenue generated from the garage would pay back the bonds.
Thank you.
Senator McDaniel for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the money will be used basically to subsidize the construction of the parking garage.
Yes,
And there'll be, I'm assuming, some sort of repayment mechanism back to the state, correct?
yes. We anticipate a private company to run the garage, as I described, Senator Filligan. It would generate revenue, which would pay back the county, which would then pay back the state.
Any studies or projections on the feasibility of that?
Yes, I have some here. I'll be happy to share with you, but it's anticipated that the annual revenue from fees will be around 960,000. And then they'll need to hire a company to run it and staff it. It'll be privately run. It won't be run by the county, somebody who is in the parking garage business. And then the fees that would come into the garage would then go to the county.
I guess if I have a concern is this, if the project seems viable on its face, one would think the market would allow the operation of it without government subsidies. So I guess my concern is, are we taking a risk here?
Well, the risk to the state is zero. Because if the project, let's just say the whole thing fails, the economy collapses, the whole thing fails, Hinds County is going to be responsible for paying the state back. And that can even come out of their homestead exemption payments. So the risk is being borne by the county, not by the state. And the reason that we're bringing this forward is the business of a parking garage is it's just simply hard to finance and go get loans for parking garages because they don't generate revenue like a typical business. And that's part of the reason that we're bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Seeing none, for a motion.
Time sufficient to pass.
Motion is title sufficient to pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. And last on the agenda is Senate Bill number 3164, the tax bill. This is the Senate tax plan that we have discussed in a prior meeting, and I'll provide you with the printout in your packet. You should have a printout of what the tax does. It phases out the 4% bracket over 4 years. It cuts the grocery tax from 7% to 5%. It gets the state out of the car tag fees. The total recurring revenue loss to the state is $316 million. It also does a rebate check for $131 million, roughly $131 million, a one-time rebate at a minimum of $100 up to a maximum of $1,000 per tax filing. And that number is reflective by a minimum of 100 if you had to have paid a liability to the state in order to receive a rebate. So that is an explanation of the tax bill. It's not very complicated. It does not raise any fees anywhere, does not raise any sales tax or any other taxes in the bill. I do have two things to point out. One of the things that we're going to add on the floor is an amendment that we are triple checking with the Department of Revenue on, and it's the portion of the grocery tax that goes to make the cities whole. That is actually more than just the city diversion. It's also a diversion for education enhancement funds, it's the school ad valorem and the infrastructure. So all those have to be calculated and verified. And we have a printout from Department of Revenue. We're double checking those, going to make sure they're right. And we'll have an amendment on the floor that spells out those diversions to make sure that the cities are kept whole from the reduction in the grocery tax from 7% to 5%, but also all these other funds that get a diversion, those will be made whole as well. So that is one of the amendments. The other amendment that I'm gonna offer is in section 22. It deals with the rebate, and on lines 1722 and 1723, where it says be no less than $100, we're going to add per taxpayer and no more than $1,000 and add per tax return. So it's capped at $1,000 for family and individual. You can add both people filing up to $1,000. So that's what that is supposed to clarify on the rebate. Are there any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Are there any other questions on the bill? Senator Fillingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a question. I may have been on the amendment, but talking about the rebate checks, are those subject to like garnishments as far as if you owe the child support at CPS or you owe back taxes to the state of Mississippi? I think in the past, when we've done different varying sorts of rebates or give backs, there have been provisions put into place to make sure that those items are collected for child support or back taxes. I was just curious, without having read every word of this yet, is that in there?
I don't see that, but we can certainly make sure that that's part of it. But if you'd like to add an amendment.
And you may
that.
already have language from when we did some of this stuff last session regarding the COVID dollars, whatever
Yeah.
y'all would think well of doing, but I think we should certainly make provisions for that.
I'll check with Department of Revenue on that. Thank you, Senator Fillingham. It's a good question. Any other questions? Senator Bryan.
At the appropriate time, I would like to speak on the bill.
Sure.
Is this the appropriate time?
Just about, let me check, make sure there are any questions. Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're probably able to answer these questions. I don't know if I should direct them to the department or to you. Is there someone here from the department that could perhaps?
I do see a few people here, but
If
ask them, and if I don't know it, I'll certainly defer to them.
First, trying to understand the income, that is the revenue collections by year. And the charts that I'm looking at show that roughly 10 years ago, our collections were about $4.7 billion. Is that your understanding as well?
If you say that is, I'll trust I don't think you would mislead.
No, I hope not. I would try not to. It looks to be about $4.7 billion, and that's in fiscal year 2012. And what we've seen over the last 10 years was a pretty substantial increase in those collections. In fact, just 3 years ago, we had reached the $6 billion mark. If my math is correct, that's about $1.25 billion more dollars that the state is bringing in that really has nothing to do with the federal expenditures, either directly or indirectly generating economic activity. I think those numbers are correct. And if that's the case, our government's grown by a substantial amount in just the last 10 years. In fact, it looks like beginning in 2020, there was another spike. And I can only assume, I may be wrong about this, that was caused by federal injection of monies. Roughly about 20, it spikes from 6 billion to almost 7 billion. Is that correct?
I believe so. And I think, I'm not sure the time frame, but I know there's been a couple of federal injections through ARA and some other federal programs that have injected billions of dollars into our state over the last 15 or so years.
Right. We did initiate a tax reduction. I guess it was 18 or 19. We eliminated the 3%. Correct?
16 is when we passed the bill.
Right.
It eliminated the 3% over 4 or 5 years. And then we're also eliminating the business franchise tax, and we're in year 4 of 10 of that.
It looks like, now again, this is just the eye test on the charts. It looks like part of that growth in revenue took place just after those phase outs or those reductions began. Is that accurate?
It could be. I don't have the chart, the numbers you're looking at. I'm not sure which.
Okay. I guess the point is, it seems to support the theory that if tax cuts are done, and they can indeed stimulate economic activity in the long term, strangely enough, it can actually bring more revenue into a government, can it?
That's the theory.
Right. Seems to be the case. All right. So now that I understand those numbers, let me understand the real world numbers of what this tax plan does. And again, I'm not here today in full-throated defense of the House plan at all. You know that. You and I have discussed that.
Mhm.
This plan, if implemented, would roughly give back the average Mississippi taxpayer around $200 over the course of 4 years, right?
In conjunction with a rebate and the grocery tax cut, it's a little more than that, but yes.
Okay.
The actual individual impact to a filer is they will phase out the 4% bracket.
Gotcha. Roughly about $50 a year
Mhm.
to a filer. And then the other part of the Senate plan would be some form of reduction in car tags, but that's another small amount, $3 to 50 cents to $5 tops, right?
Correct.
Okay. I guess my concern here is that obviously I don't think the plan goes far enough. If we're attempting to eliminate the income tax, we do so because studies have shown that eliminating the income tax generates substantial economic activity. I'm not sure this plan would stimulate consumption enough to generate that activity. Now, don't get me wrong. You know me, I'm for any tax reduction we can get at any time. I'm a Milton Friedman kind of guy. But at the same time, if the Senate takes this step, and it's such a minor step compared to the total elimination, are we guaranteeing ourselves in the future that the elimination of the income tax would be completely off the table?
Well, I would say to your argument, I think you just cited the 2016 tax cut and you said that it stimulated the economy, and that was the 3% bracket.
Right.
And we're talking about implementing the 4% bracket and doing this over a 4-year period when we're
Right.
still not even halfway through implementing the 2016 tax cut. So I would say, comparatively speaking, I believe this is an aggressive attempt to move more money out of into the hands of Mississippians over a shorter period of time, and to do so without raising sales tax on anybody.
Right. I don't doubt there would be some stimulating effect on the economy. The question is how much and to what extent. My concern is if we take a quarter measure here and we stimulate it somewhat, the numbers could improve. But it may get to the point by taking these smaller steps, we find it impossible in the future to keep our eye on the target and eliminate the income tax. That's my primary concern. Now, going back to the earlier issue, the House plan, I like the framework because at least their target is on the income tax reduction aspect. But I'm not a big fan, obviously, as we've discussed, on the offset. So I tell you what, I'll probably have a lot more questions at some point. I don't want to prolong this. I know Senator Bryant has a lot of things to say. And I feel comfortable that once he's done, I'll need to respond. So I'll stop at this stage.
All right, Senator Blunt, you have a question? Okay. You want a question? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. He did.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question, and just to give it some context, I was at the baseball fields for a ball practice this past weekend, which is where politics happens a lot of times, and we have discussions. And one of the parents on Levi's baseball team is a small business owner, and he has a business that puts out some of my favorite products, which is ice cream, and he has several franchises, and he was telling me that they're looking at inflation right now, and he's having to increase prices. I think he said around 20% from where they are currently to deal with inflation. And he was concerned that any increase in the sales tax would possibly lead customers to not even go into his store and bother buying something like ice cream because it would increase the price, which they're already having to do to deal with the current situation we find ourselves in with inflation and the cost of the dollar just not being the same as what it was. So I just want to make sure in this tax bill, and I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure we're not raising the sales tax or raising any taxes in this Tax Relief Act of 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2021, Mississippi was ranked number 3 in the country for the amount of welfare that we receive from the federal government. Will this tax reduction take us off of the welfare rolls from the federal government?
If you're including, your assumption of welfare, I'm sure it includes a lot of federal monies we get for Medicaid and other programs. No, the answer is no, it will not. I don't know, quite frankly, I don't think every state gets federal money back to them. We just happen to get more than most.
And we'll continue getting more than most?
I don't foresee any change in the future, immediate future, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, Senator Bryan, you wanted to speak on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank the chair for distributing the summary of this bill some time ago. Regardless of how we feel about the bill, it's proper for the committee to have a chance to look at it, think about it. I appreciate the chair doing that. Senator McDaniel said a number of things. One of the things he said was that I had many things to say. He was correct about that statement, but I wish to assure members of the committee that I will not say everything that I have to say, although I'm willing to, but I'll try to cut to the chase. This is just a very sad situation from my perspective, because the only reason we're here is because of a fixation on the other end of this building about abolishing the income tax. That's not generated by anybody in Mississippi. That obsession, abolishing the income tax, is generated by a bunch of out-of-state organizations whose fundamental belief is you don't need any taxation, you don't need any government, and any tax cut is good, and particularly get rid of a tax cut like the income tax. And so that's their mindset and that's their core beliefs. So that's always going to be their recommendation. The first argument in favor of this was that if we eliminated the income tax, then people would flock to Mississippi because that would have them all move here to save income tax. Well, of course, that proposition is laughable on its face. Then just think for a minute about the people you know that have left the state, young people that have left and moved off somewhere. Is there a single one of them that you think would move back to Mississippi if only we didn't have a state income tax? I mean, that's not what motivates people. We had a hearing, and again, I appreciate the chair having a hearing with the House. I thought the purpose of the hearing was to get information and discuss a proposition. But apparently the perspective of the House at this hearing is that the purpose of the hearing is to ratify a decision we have already made. I remember at some point during the hearing, I mentioned that I was opposed to any tax cut, certainly the one that was being discussed. And a member from the other house asked me, well, if you're opposed to the tax cut, why are you on this committee? And he wasn't trying to be ugly. He's a friend. I'm not upset personally about that at all. I think later he said, "Oh, it's okay for you to be here." And so I'm not taking personal offense at that comment. I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, that's an insight to the way the House looks at things, is that the decision has already been made. Everything else is a pro forma act to ratify that decision. And that's not right. Mr. Chairman, I have always tried to listen to people I disagree with. Sometimes I find out they've got a point, and almost always I think there's something to be said for the point of view that I don't have. And sometimes I find out I'm just plain wrong about something. Not often, but I think we all do. And that's what this whole process is talking amongst ourselves, listening to those we disagree with, and trying to come up with a good result. I believe, Mr. Chairman, 174 people down here, all in his or her own way. Each person wants to do what's right for Mississippi. There's just disagreement about what that is. But the only way we come to a consensus is to listen to each other and talk. And when the House takes the mindset, we've already got our mind made up, just do what we say. I just think that's unfortunate. You may remember last year, the House introduced a bill, hundreds of pages, that would completely rewrite the tax code. It was introduced on one day, and about 48 hours later, it was sitting down here in this body. That's not the way this is supposed to work. So at that hearing, one of the speakers was Grover Norquist, who famously said that he wanted to shrink government so small that you could drown it in a bathtub. I asked him about 3 or 4 times, did you say that? And Mr. Norquist simply never would answer the question. Well, why not? I mean, he said it. I just wanted him to explain what he meant by it. But he just refused to answer. So, Mr. Chairman, I was here when we passed the highway program in 1987 and raised taxes to have the 4-lane system that we have now. And I asked Mr. Norquist how he would have voted on that bill, and he refused to answer the question. Well, I would say, I don't think there's anybody that thinks we're not better off today for having passed that 4-lane highway program. Among other things, we wouldn't have Toyota, because if we didn't have an interstate type highway going through those red clay hills in the middle of nowhere in Union and Pontotoc counties, we never would have had Toyota locate there. And the 4-lane highway system has been basic infrastructure. And we sure as the dickens got it built cheaper than we could ever hope to build it today. So I just think it's misguided to say that eliminating taxation is an end unto itself. But that is the genesis of this. And the genesis of this is not from Mississippi. There's not a single person in this room. Think about your campaign. Did you own a campaign of abolishing the state income tax? Was that an issue in any campaign? It's just come up because of this push from out of state. And the out of state people don't care. We're just a box to check off on their list. They're not from here. They're not going to be here. They just have an ideology, and they are going around the country promoting it. We are at a most uncertain time, but we're also at a time where we have enormous needs that are not being met. The state highway program is like $20 or $25 billion last time I checked. I'm sure the fair market value of that's much greater now. Is there any private entity anywhere that would have a $25+ billion asset and not maintain it? But that, in fact, is what we're doing with our highways. We're not putting enough money in the highway department to maintain our existing roads. We've been told this for years. We've been told this by Republican highway commissioners. We're now being told the same thing by the Commissioner of Transportation, who was a former executive director of the state party, the state Republican Party, as I understand it. This is not a partisan issue. Maintaining highways is just simply good government. It's one of the core functions of government. I suppose if all taxation is bad, we would be better off abolishing the gasoline tax. We could cut everybody's gas price at the pump. Who wouldn't be in favor of that? And just not spend any money on the roads, just let them all deteriorate. But we would have cut taxes. I mean, you can see how that works with roads, but it works everywhere else. Look at our government. We are losing workers every day. We can't keep engineers at the highway department because we don't pay them enough to be competitive with private industry. And as soon as they get through their period of training, they leave the highway department, go to work for private industry, and we can't keep engineers long-term. Look at the Department of Environmental Quality. It's the same way. They hire professionals. You've got to pay professionals the market rate. We're not doing that. We have statutes on our books about how much we're to fund public schools. It's the law. We have for years disobeyed the law by not funding public schools. And we've told we're doing the best we can. We have money, we don't have the money, but we've got the money now. Why are we not fully funding the adequate education formula and the public school building fund and the supply money, which is in the law? Why are we not doing that? We have tax cuts that are going into effect right now. I see, Mr. Chairman, that at full implementation, this would be $316 million a year out of the general fund. Now let's think about that for a minute. What could you do with $316 million a year in perpetuity? Well, I think you could have a bond issue of about $5 billion. So you could have $5 billion cash to put into roads. Think how transformative it would be to spend $5 billion on roads in Mississippi. Think about the water and sewer needs all over the state. You could, for the same amount of money, have $5 billion to go into water and sewer. And it always, Monroe County is about 1% of the state, so I can't think of these big numbers, so I sort of, reduce them down to something I might understand. That would be $500 million, $500 million that could go to Monroe County, water and sewer. Or alternatively, again, $316 million every year, it's about $3 million a year for Monroe County. And counties vary, you may have a little bit smaller, but something to think about. I sort of understand $3 million a year for Monroe County. Think what that could do for the county. I don't have a hue and cry from my constituents for a tax cut. They want water. They want sewer. They want roads. They want broadband. They want to have money to educate their children. And it'd be nice if you didn't have to pay a fortune in tuition if you were attending a college. And I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, the time. I appreciate the committee's time, and I don't want to impose further than I have. But as uncertain as everything is, this is not, in my opinion, a time to be taking any steps that are going to have the long-term implications that this proposition would have, particularly when we have an opportunity with the same amount of money to do things that would really be transformative and I think really make a difference in the state. I'll just say this in closing, Mr. Chairman. I've heard over and over that somehow these tax cuts will stimulate the economy. Well, let's think about that. Suppose we spent $300 million a year on roads instead of on this tax cut. That $300 million would be spent in the state of Mississippi. That would be economic activity in Mississippi. Why isn't it that $300 million, all of which would be spent in Mississippi, wouldn't have a stimulating effect, just like spending $300 million on consumer goods, assuming it was all spent? Part of it's going to be saved, part of it won't be spent, but it certainly won't all be spent in Mississippi. Why is it, again, to take another example, if the state of Mississippi builds a $10 million building in Mississippi, that doesn't have $10 million worth of economic stimulus in Mississippi. But if we cut taxes $10 million and someone over here gets a $10 million tax cut and builds a building, that's an economic stimulus. The economy doesn't know the difference of where the $10 million came from. As long as we're doing, which we do, is spend money primarily in Mississippi, which turns over in Mississippi. I just think that although this proposition is not as misguided as the House proposition is, it's still a bad idea. I think almost all the other alternatives are better. And for that reason, I oppose the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Senator McDaniel, do you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I was under the assumption that was going to be Hobbs' brief speech. I think I took so many notes or went out of paper. But he made some good points, and I want to talk about those points as best I remember them and recollect them, because obviously Hobbs is a smart guy, and he's been here a long time, and he has a lot to say for sure, and I appreciate that. The picture he painted, in some respects, he framed it, I think, inaccurately. The question is whether or not we have roads or not. We're going to have roads. The question is whether we're going to have a functioning economy or not, which is something we haven't had in an awful long time. I think there's cause and effect there. We have tried, Mississippi has for years, to depend on government handouts and subsidies from the federal government, progressive taxation schemes. And for years, we've been mired, stuck, wondering why it is we keep repeating the same policies and have the exact same results. I don't think it's a coincidence. The House at least has put the proper framework before the body. Income tax elimination, that's the target, that's the prize. It's a prize not because outside groups are negotiating that issue. It's a prize because we've seen the effects that the elimination of an income tax has on a state's economy. To Hobbs' point, he's right. People won't stop moving back here simply because we eliminate 5%. But if the elimination of that 5% spread across the state generates massive economic output and more jobs and more prosperity, they will move back. It's a long-term play, but it's the proper play, allowing the market to operate in an arena where we still have roads. But the answer is not to continue growing this government, moving the wrong direction, and pretending that the growth of it somehow doesn't have an effect or an impact on the private sector. It's not our money. We always tend to forget that. It's not our money. This government has nothing unless it first takes by force from the population. The dollar we take by force comes to government and it is eroded. Administrative cost, agency corruption, whatever the case may be. When we return that dollar, it's never as strong as it once was. And so we wonder why it is when we tax so much, there's a negative outcome on economic prosperity. That is why. Now, here's the thing I want to address really quickly, and I know it's getting late, and I know lunchtime's here. Senator Barnett's been trying to get me to hush now for 5 minutes. Now, consider the logic here and consider the rationale. Remember, it's not roads versus anarchy. Just 10 years ago, I was here, I think many of you were, we had a budget of $4.7 billion incoming. We still had roads, still had schools. We were still functioning as a state. I don't remember all the calamities that occurred when this state was operating at a $4.7 billion budget. That's just 10 years ago. Now we're hearing that any minor cut in this massive growth is going to be cataclysmic. It doesn't pass the smell test. If we reached a baseline of operations back just 10 years ago of $4.7 billion, it stands to reason we could still operate around that same area with inflation naturally being taken into consideration. Here we are now, looking pretty comfortable at $6 billion. That's $1.25 billion more than we had just 10 years ago. But now we're hearing that cuts are going to be cataclysmic. We're starting this conversation from the wrong area. The question should be, were we able to function at $5 billion? And the answer was unequivocally yes. And if that's the case, why haven't we made necessary reductions and the necessary corrections to be able to provide the income tax elimination? I'm afraid we don't, because government's natural course is always to grow. The tendency is always to expand. And ultimately, it's the people who suffer when it expands, because remember, the government has to have more and more of their income to survive. And this body seemingly has no appetite for the reduction of its size and scope. Now, look, I'm going to support this, obviously, but I don't think it takes us to our target. I don't think it goes far enough. With everything we should be doing as a body, both House and Senate, is to find a way to eliminate the income tax. Now, the House, I don't think offsetting it is the answer either. I think there are ways to get there. Unfortunately, the chambers are so far apart, I sense that both of these bills will die, and the people in Mississippi will continue to suffer under a progressive income tax structure. And Mr. Chairman, I have so much more to say, but Senator Bryan took most of my time. So I guess I'll do my best to have the conversation at some point on the floor whenever you bring it up. I appreciate your patience with me.
Thank you, Senator McDaniel. Any other comments on the bill? Seeing none. You have a question, comment? Senator McMahon, you recognize.
I wanted to thank you, Senator Harkins and Senator Johnson and Senator Sparks, for your work on this bill. This is a conservative piece of legislation. It's a step in the right direction. It is a tax cut. In projecting the size and scope of spending from year to year is no easy task. And I know that hundreds of man hours have gone behind the scenes to bring us a bill. I don't like everything about the bill, but it's a step in the right direction. I want to commend you three on the work and the committee on the work that's been done. We've had multiple hearings on this. I do want to bring to the attention of the committee that we are in a time of inflation. And looking currently at the budget before us, there's an excess, roughly a projection of about 1.3 billion. That's what the projection is. If you look at the commitment that this body has made to the teacher pay raise, that's $300 million next year. The other increases in salaries for state employees so that they can remain competitive and retain professionals is another 150 million. Now, here's a number that no one's really thinking about. We hear from the federal government that inflation is 7%. That is an anemic number. Inflation will probably be 10% next year. And when you look at inflation, that's $600 million to a $6 billion budget. 600 million plus the 300 plus the 150, the $1 billion is gone for next year. We are in a time when we don't know exactly what inflation is, but I can tell you this, I think at 10%, it's an anemic number because commodity prices are up in many cases over 50%. The paper industry is up over 56%. Pork is up 22%. Plastic's up 60%. There's all types of inflation, and the numbers for inflation, the federal government's not being honest with us about this, about the inflationary. Now the Russians have invaded Ukraine. Gas is going to surge forward. That is a certainty. So this is a conservative approach, a step forward in the right direction. And I'm proud to support the legislation, even though it's not everything I want or would like to see immediately. I think it's a very conservative approach to being sure that we have the funds to fund the state government next year and to serve the people of Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments for motion. Motion is title sufficient to pass committee sub. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. All opposed? Motion.